I woke up to pounding on my front door at 5:30 in the morning, which is never a good sign in any situation, but especially not in a neighborhood governed by the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association in Scottsdale, Arizona. My name is Gregory Yarborough, and I had lived in this cookie-cutter suburb for 3 years without major incident until that Tuesday morning in March. I stumbled out of bed, pulled on a pair of jeans over my boxer shorts, and made my way downstairs while whoever was at the door continued their assault on the wood. Through the peephole, I could see a rotund woman in her mid-50s with a severe blonde bob and a pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I recognized her immediately as Patricia Henderson, the HOA president and the bane of every reasonable person's existence within a 5-mile radius. I opened the door just as she raised her fist to pound again. "You have any idea what time it is?" I asked, my voice still thick with sleep. "Mr. Yarborough, your generator trailer has been towed from the street in front of your property. You received 3 warnings about parking recreational vehicles and equipment on public streets within the community." My stomach dropped. What? What generator trailer? "The large utility trailer with the industrial generator that has been parked in front of your home for the past 18 hours. It violates Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws. I personally called the towing company at 5 this morning when I noticed it was still there." My mind raced. The generator. The mayor's emergency generator. Oh God, Patricia, please tell me you're joking. "I do not joke about HOA violations, Mr. Yarborough. The trailer has been removed to Precision Towing on East McDowell Road. You may retrieve it for a fee of $375, plus the HOA fine of $500 for the violation." "That generator doesn't belong to me," I practically shouted. "Mayor Richardson borrowed it yesterday afternoon for the emergency shelter at the Civic Center." The winter storm knocked out power to half the city. Patricia's face remained impassive. "Then Mayor Richardson should have ensured it was parked in an appropriate location. Your driveway was available. It wouldn't fit in my driveway. The trailer is 18 feet long, and my driveway is only 16 feet deep. We discussed this. I told him to park it on the street for one night, and he'd pick it up first thing this morning. The bylaws are quite clear, Mr. Yarborough. There are people without heat, Patricia. Elderly people, families with children. The shelter needed that generator to keep the heating system running." She crossed her arms. "Perhaps next time the mayor will plan better. I have documented everything with photographs. You now have an additional violation on your record." 3 violations within a calendar year result in a hearing before the HOA board, possible suspension of community privileges, and potential legal action. This is your 2nd violation this year. I tried to remember what my first violation had been. The garden gnome. The unauthorized lawn ornament, yes. Gnomes are not on the approved decorative items list. It was 6 inches tall. Size is irrelevant to the bylaws. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a community to manage. Good day, Mr. Yarborough." She turned on her heel and walked back to her white Lexus SUV parked in my driveway, blocking me in. I watched her drive away as the sky began to lighten with the approaching dawn. The temperature was still hovering around 32 degrees, unseasonably cold for Arizona, even in March. The freak winter storm that had blown in from the north had caught everyone off guard, and I knew the shelter was probably packed with people who had inadequate heating in their homes or, worse, no homes at all. I grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter and called Mayor Richardson's office number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried his personal cell, which he had given me when he borrowed the generator yesterday. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding as exhausted as I felt. Gregory, is everything all right? Mayor Richardson, I have some really bad news. The HOA president had your generator towed about 20 minutes ago. There was a long silence on the other end. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Patricia Henderson, my HOA president, had the generator trailer towed because it was parked on the street overnight. It's at Precision Towing on East McDowell. You're telling me that while we have 300 people at the emergency shelter, including 47 senior citizens and 23 children under the age of 5, someone towed the generator that's keeping them from freezing. That's exactly what I'm telling you. I heard him take a deep breath. I'm at the shelter right now. We're running on the backup generator, but it's only got about 4 hours of fuel left, and we can't get a replacement generator delivered until this afternoon at the earliest. Most rental places are completely tapped out because of the storm. Your generator was our lifeline. I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would do this. This isn't your fault, Gregory. Give me the towing company's address. I'll handle this. I gave him the information and we hung up. I felt sick to my stomach. I had purchased that generator 2 years ago after a summer monsoon knocked out power to my house for 3 days, spoiling everything in my refrigerator and leaving me sweltering in 110-degree heat. It was a significant investment at $8,000, but it could power my entire house, and then some. When the mayor's office had put out a call for anyone with industrial generators willing to help during the emergency, I had volunteered immediately. The mayor himself had come to pick it up, grateful and relieved. Now it was sitting in an impound lot while people froze. I got dressed properly and made myself coffee, though my hands were shaking too much from anger to really enjoy it. I kept thinking about those families at the shelter, probably wondering why the heat had suddenly become less reliable. I thought about Patricia Henderson in her climate-controlled house, sleeping soundly after her morning enforcement activities. My phone rang at 6:45. It was Mayor Richardson again. Gregory, we have a problem. The towing company won't release the generator without payment, and they're saying they can't take a city check without verification from their corporate office, which doesn't open until 9. I've got my assistant working on getting cash together, but I'm looking at 10 o'clock at the earliest before we can get that generator back to the shelter. What about the backup generator? We're stretching the fuel as much as we can. I've had to make some difficult decisions about which areas of the building to heat. We're concentrating everyone in the main hall and letting the auxiliary spaces go cold. What do you need me to do? Honestly, I need you to get me your HOA president's contact information. I'd like to have a conversation with her about her priorities. I gave him Patricia's cell phone number and email address. She's not going to care, Mayor Richardson. She's the kind of person who would ticket a fire truck for parking in a red zone. We'll see about that. After we hung up, I decided I couldn't just sit in my house. I drove to the Civic Center, which was about 15 minutes from my neighborhood. The parking lot was packed with cars, and I could see people coming and going through the main entrance. Inside, the main hall had been transformed into a temporary shelter. Cots were set up in rows, and volunteers were distributing blankets and hot coffee. The room was warm, but I noticed people were still bundled up in their coats. I found Mayor Richardson near the back of the hall, talking to a woman with a clipboard. He was in his early 60s, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent his entire career in public service. When he saw me, he excused himself and walked over. Gregory, thanks for coming down. You didn't have to do that. I felt responsible. Has Patricia called you back? His expression darkened. She has. She informed me that HOA bylaws supersede emergency situations, and that if I wanted to use residential property for city purposes, I should have filed for a special permit with her board at least 72 hours in advance. I felt my jaw drop. She said that, while people are freezing. Her exact words were that proper planning prevents poor performance. That's insane. She's insane. She's certainly something. Look, I've got my city attorney looking into this. There might be legal ramifications for interfering with emergency services, but that's going to take time we don't have. Right now, I need to focus on keeping people safe and warm. What if I pay the impound fee myself? I can get the generator out right now. Gregory, that's $375. I don't care. These people need heat. Mayor Richardson looked at me for a long moment, then put his hand on my shoulder. That's incredibly generous. Are you sure? Positive. Give me the address again. I'll head over there right now. He wrote down the information, then added, "We'll reimburse you, of course. I'll make sure the city cuts you a check by the end of the week. Don't worry about it. Just take care of these people." I drove to Precision Towing, which was located in an industrial area east of downtown. The lot was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and the office was a small concrete building that looked like it had been built in the 70s and never updated. Inside, a man in his 30s with a patchy beard sat behind a scarred desk, eating a breakfast burrito. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "I'm here to pick up a generator trailer that was towed from Riverside Meadows this morning." "Name?" "Gregory Yarborough." He typed something into his computer. "Yeah, got it. Big utility trailer with a Honda generator. That'll be $375, cash or card." I handed him my credit card, wincing internally at the charge. He ran it through an old card reader that made a grinding noise, then printed out a receipt. "You'll need to sign this release form. You're acknowledging that the vehicle was lawfully towed and that there's no damage." "I haven't even seen it yet. It's fine. They're always fine." I signed the form because I didn't have time to argue. He gave me a key and pointed toward the back lot, third row near the fence. I found the trailer exactly where he said it would be. The generator looked fine, still strapped down and covered with a tarp. I did a quick inspection, checking the fuel level and making sure nothing had been damaged during the tow. Everything seemed intact. I hitched it to my truck, which I had brought specifically for this purpose, and drove back to the Civic Center. Mayor Richardson met me outside, along with 2 city maintenance workers who helped unhitch the trailer and wheel it inside to where it needed to be connected. Within 20 minutes, the generator was back online and I could hear the heating system kick into a higher gear. The relief on everyone's faces was palpable. "I can't thank you enough," the mayor said. "You probably saved lives today. Just doing what anyone would do. Not anyone. Some people would rather follow rules than help their neighbors." He was looking at his phone, frowning. "What is it?" "Patricia Henderson just sent me an email. She's informing me that because you aided in the retrieval of the trailer, you're now in violation of Section 18, Paragraph 7 of the HOA bylaws, which prohibits using personal vehicles for commercial purposes within the community. Helping during an emergency is commercial purposes." According to her interpretation, moving a trailer for city business constitutes commercial activity. I felt something inside me snap. I had been patient with Patricia Henderson for 3 years. I had paid my HOA dues on time, kept my lawn maintained to their exacting standards, and even removed my beloved garden gnome without complaint. But this was too much. "I'm going to have a conversation with her," I said. "Gregory, don't do anything you'll regret." "Oh, I won't regret this. Trust me." I drove back to Riverside Meadows, directly to Patricia Henderson's house. It was one of the larger homes in the community, a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa with a 3-car garage and professionally landscaped yard. I rang the doorbell and waited. She opened the door wearing a different pantsuit, this one navy blue. "Mr. Yarborough, I'm surprised to see you. We need to talk. If this is about the violations, there's nothing to discuss. The bylaws are clear. Patricia, do you understand what you did this morning? You towed a generator that was being used to heat an emergency shelter. There are children there, elderly people, vulnerable people who could have died if we couldn't get that generator back. That's very dramatic, Mr. Yarborough, but the reality is that rules exist for a reason. If we allow one person to violate the bylaws, everyone will think they can do whatever they want. This wasn't about property values or aesthetics. This was about human lives. And I'm sure the mayor has many resources at his disposal. One generator more or less isn't going to make that much difference." I stared at her, genuinely shocked by her callousness. "How can you say that? How can you be so completely devoid of empathy?" "I'm not devoid of empathy, Mr. Yarborough. I'm practical. I have a responsibility to maintain the standards of this community, and I take that responsibility seriously. Your emotional appeals don't change the fact that you broke the rules." "Fine. You want to talk about rules? Let's talk about rules. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. The bylaws state that any homeowner can request an emergency meeting if they can get signatures from 20% of the residents. I'm betting I can get those signatures by tomorrow." Her expression finally changed, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "You're wasting your time. The board supports my decisions. We'll see about that." I turned and walked back to my truck. As I drove away, I could see her standing in her doorway, watching me leave. I spent the rest of that day and all of the next going door to door in the neighborhood. Riverside Meadows had 240 homes, which meant I needed signatures from 48 residents. I was prepared for it to be difficult, but I was surprised by how many people were eager to sign. The first house I stopped at belonged to an elderly couple, the Martins, who lived 3 houses down from me. Mrs. Martin answered the door with a warm smile that faded when she saw the petition in my hand. "Is this about Patricia Henderson?" she asked. "How did you know?" "She fined us $200 last month because our mailbox was the wrong shade of black. We had to repaint it 3 times before she approved it. Where do I sign?" At the next house, a young father named Tom Riley told me about how Patricia had forced him to remove a basketball hoop from his driveway because it violated the recreational equipment clause. His kids were devastated. "They're 8 and 10 years old," he said, signing the petition with barely controlled anger. "They just wanted to play basketball in their own driveway. But no, apparently that ruins the neighborhood aesthetic." By the end of the first day, I had 62 signatures. By the end of the second day, I had 93. People came out of the woodwork with stories about Patricia's tyrannical enforcement of increasingly petty rules. Someone had been fined for having the wrong color roses. Someone else had been cited for parking their car in their own driveway facing the wrong direction. A woman named Sandra told me she had received a violation notice because her 6-year-old daughter had drawn a hopscotch court on their private driveway with washable chalk. The emergency meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at the community clubhouse. I had never seen the room so packed. Every chair was taken, and people lined the walls. Patricia sat at the head table with the other 4 board members, all of whom looked extremely uncomfortable. She, however, looked as composed as ever. I stood at the front of the room with my petition and began to speak. "Thank you all for coming. I called this meeting because I believe our HOA president has overstepped her authority and created an environment where following rules has become more important than being a good neighbor. 4 days ago, Patricia Henderson had a generator trailer towed from in front of my house. That generator was being used to provide emergency power to the Civic Center shelter, where over 300 people were seeking refuge from the winter storm. Her actions could have resulted in serious harm to vulnerable people. Patricia stood up. Mr. Yarborough is misrepresenting the situation. The trailer was in violation of clearly stated bylaws. I was simply doing my job. Your job is to serve the community, not terrorize it, someone shouted from the back. The room erupted in agreement. Patricia's face flushed red. I will not be spoken to this way. I have devoted 5 years to this association, maintaining our property values and our standards. You've devoted 5 years to making everyone miserable, Mrs. Martin called out. My husband and I are in our 70s, and we've lived in 20 different places over our lives. This is the first one where we've dreaded coming home. One of the other board members, a middle-aged man named Richard Fuller, cleared his throat. Patricia, I think we need to discuss this. I've been receiving complaints, and I have to admit, I'm concerned about the direction we've been heading. Richard, we've talked about this. Strong enforcement is necessary. Strong enforcement, yes, but there's a difference between enforcement and harassment. The generator incident was the last straw for a lot of people. Patricia looked around the table at the other board members. None of them would meet her eyes. I could see her realizing that she had lost their support. Fine, she said coldly. If the board doesn't support me, I'll resign. But don't come crying to me when property values plummet and this place turns into a slum. We'll take that risk, Richard said quietly. Patricia gathered her papers, stood up, and walked out of the room without another word. The silence she left behind was deafening, then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Richard called the meeting back to order. Okay, folks, we need to elect a new president. Do we have any nominations? To my absolute horror, Mrs. Martin raised her hand and said, I nominate Gregory Yarborough. The room erupted in agreement before I could protest. Within 15 minutes, I had been unanimously elected as the new HOA president, a position I had absolutely no desire to hold but couldn't figure out how to refuse without looking like a coward after everything that had just happened. The meeting adjourned, and I was immediately surrounded by people wanting to talk about various issues. It took me 2 hours to extract myself from the clubhouse. When I finally got home, I collapsed on my couch and stared at the ceiling, wondering what I had gotten myself into. My phone rang. It was Mayor Richardson. Gregory, I heard what happened at your HOA meeting. Congratulations on the election. Thanks, I think. How did you hear about it already? Small town, and I have friends in your neighborhood. Listen, I wanted to let you know that the city attorney looked into Patricia Henderson's actions. There are some potential legal issues with what she did. What kind of legal issues? Interfering with emergency services is a serious matter. In Arizona, there are statutes that protect emergency operations from interference. What she did could potentially be charged as a misdemeanor, possibly even a felony depending on how the prosecutor wants to handle it. I sat up straight. You're saying she could face criminal charges? It's possible. The prosecutor's office is reviewing the case now. They've asked me to provide a statement about the impact her actions had on the shelter operations. Will they really charge her? That's up to them. But between you and me, they're taking it seriously. We had to divert resources to deal with the generator situation, and there were legitimate safety concerns for the people at the shelter. Add in the cost to you personally, and the fact that she essentially held city property hostage, and you've got a fairly compelling case. Wow. I never thought it would go this far. Actions have consequences. She made a choice that put people at risk. Now she has to deal with the results. We talked for a few more minutes, then hung up. I sat there processing everything. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt uneasy about the idea of Patricia facing criminal charges. She was petty and mean-spirited, but I wasn't sure if what she did rose to the level of criminal behavior. 2 weeks later, I got my answer. The Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office filed charges against Patricia Henderson for obstruction of emergency services and theft by conversion. The theft charge related to the fact that the generator belonged to me, and she had essentially stolen it by having it towed without proper authority. Each charge carried potential jail time and significant fines. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some people felt it was excessive. Most thought it was exactly what she deserved. I was conflicted about the whole thing. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for mid-April. I received a subpoena to testify, which made sense since I was the generator's owner and the one who had to pay to retrieve it. Mayor Richardson was also subpoenaed, along with several city officials who could speak to the impact on shelter operations. The day of the hearing, I put on my best suit and drove to the Maricopa County Superior Court building in downtown Phoenix. The courthouse was busy, filled with lawyers, defendants, and witnesses all navigating the criminal justice system. I found the correct courtroom and took a seat in the gallery. Patricia arrived with her attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her usual armor of righteous indignation. When she saw me, she looked away quickly. The hearing was mostly procedural. The prosecutor, a young woman named Jennifer Moss, laid out the charges and the evidence. Patricia's attorney argued that his client had been acting within her authority as HOA president and had no criminal intent. The judge, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, listened to both sides without much expression. "Miss Henderson," the judge finally said, "do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia said quietly. "And how do you plead?" Her attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. She nodded, then said, "Not guilty, Your Honor." The judge set a trial date for June and released Patricia on her own recognizance. The whole thing took less than 30 minutes. As I left the courtroom, Jennifer Moss caught up with me in the hallway. "Mr. Yarborough, thank you for being here today. I wanted to let you know that we're taking this case very seriously. What Miss Henderson did was reckless and dangerous. I appreciate that. I'm still processing everything, to be honest. I understand. This is probably not how you expected things to go when you volunteered your generator. That's an understatement. We may need you to testify at trial. Would you be willing to do that? Of course. I want to help however I can." "Good. We'll be in touch as we get closer to the trial date." I drove home feeling drained. Being the HOA president was turning out to be more complicated than I had anticipated. In the month since I had taken over, I had been dealing with a constant stream of issues, complaints, and questions. Some were legitimate concerns about maintenance or safety. Others were just people wanting to vent about their neighbors. I was learning that running an HOA required diplomacy, patience, and a much thicker skin than I possessed. The good news was that I had been able to start rolling back some of Patricia's more draconian policies. I organized a community vote to revise the bylaws, removing several of the most restrictive and arbitrary rules. The mailbox color requirement was eliminated. Basketball hoops were now allowed in driveways. Garden gnomes were permitted within reason. People could park their cars facing either direction. The changes were popular, but they also created new challenges. Without clear rules, people started pushing boundaries. Someone painted their house a shade of purple that was technically within the approved color palette, but looked absolutely ridiculous. Someone else installed a fountain in their front yard that ran 24 hours a day and kept the neighbors awake at night. I found myself having to make judgment calls constantly, trying to balance individual freedom with community harmony. Through it all, the criminal case against Patricia Henderson hung in the background like a storm cloud. I thought about it often, wondering if I had done the right thing by pushing for the emergency meeting. If I had just let it go, Patricia would still be HOA president and she wouldn't be facing criminal charges. But people were also happier now. The neighborhood felt different, lighter somehow. In May, Patricia's attorney reached out to the prosecutor's office about a plea deal. I learned about this from Jennifer Moss, who called to ask if I would be willing to participate in a victim impact statement. "What kind of plea deal?" I asked. "They're proposing that, Miss." Henderson pleaded guilty to obstruction of emergency services in exchange for dropping the theft charge. She would receive probation, community service, and have to pay restitution to you and the city. What do you think I should do? That's not my decision to make. But I will say that if we go to trial, there's always a risk. Juries can be unpredictable. A plea deal guarantees some accountability. I don't want to see her go to jail. I just wanted her to understand that what she did was wrong. The plea deal doesn't include jail time unless she violates probation. It's mostly about acknowledging responsibility and making things right. Then I think that's fair. The plea hearing was scheduled for early June. This time, the courtroom was less formal, more focused on resolution than confrontation. Patricia stood before the judge and admitted that she had obstructed emergency services by having the generator towed. Her voice was barely audible, and I found myself feeling something unexpected: pity. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced Patricia to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution of $375 to me and $1,500 to the city for the costs associated with dealing with the generator situation. He also ordered her to write a formal apology to the residents of Riverside Meadows. "Miss Henderson," the judge said, "I want to be clear about something. Your actions put vulnerable people at risk during an emergency situation. The fact that no one was seriously harmed doesn't excuse what you did. You let your desire to enforce rules override your basic human decency. I hope you'll use this experience to reflect on your priorities and your treatment of others." "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia whispered. After the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse, not sure what to do next. Patricia emerged a few minutes later with her attorney. When she saw me, she stopped. "Mr. Yarborough," she said. "Patricia, I want you to know that I'm sorry. I was wrong about the generator. I was wrong about a lot of things." I studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity, but she seemed genuine. "Thank you for saying that. For what it's worth, I think you're doing a good job as president. The community is better off with you in charge. That means a lot coming from you." She nodded and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a strange sense of closure. The whole ordeal had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had also taught me something about standing up for what was right, even when it was uncomfortable. I drove back to Riverside Meadows, where I had an HOA board meeting scheduled for that evening. We were going to discuss a proposal to install electric vehicle charging stations in the community parking areas, which was causing its own set of debates and disagreements. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw my garden gnome sitting proudly on the front lawn, all 6 inches of him. I smiled. The board meeting went smoothly. We approved the charging station proposal with some modifications to address cost concerns. We discussed organizing a neighborhood barbecue for the 4th of July. We reviewed the budget and talked about necessary repairs to the community pool. It was boring, tedious work, but it was also important. These small decisions affected people's daily lives, their happiness, their sense of home. After the meeting, Richard Fuller pulled me aside. "You know, Gregory, when you first took over, I wasn't sure you were ready for this job, but you've really stepped up. People respect you because you listen to them and treat them fairly." "Thanks, Richard. That means a lot. Though I have to admit, I still have no idea what I'm doing half the time." None of us do. That's the secret of the HOA. We're all just making it up as we go along, trying to do what's best for the community. Over the next few weeks, Patricia Henderson completed her community service by volunteering at the same civic center shelter that her actions had endangered. I heard from Mayor Richardson that she had been a dedicated volunteer, working in the kitchen and helping to organize donations. He said she seemed like a different person, more humble and willing to listen. The formal apology letter she sent to the neighborhood was published in our monthly newsletter. It was 2 pages long and surprisingly heartfelt. She acknowledged that she had let power go to her head and had lost sight of what really mattered. She admitted that she had used the HOA rules as a way to control others because she felt powerless in other areas of her life. She apologized specifically to me, to Mayor Richardson, and to the families who had been at the shelter. The response from the neighborhood was mixed. Some people accepted her apology and were ready to move on. Others felt she hadn't suffered enough consequences for her actions. A few people suggested we should invite her to the 4th of July barbecue as a gesture of reconciliation. That idea was quickly shot down. The barbecue itself was a huge success. Nearly every family in the neighborhood showed up. Kids ran around the common area playing games while adults stood around grills, drinking beer and swapping stories. It was the kind of community event that Patricia had always resisted, claiming it was too much liability and too difficult to organize. But watching everyone laugh and relax together, I realized this was what a neighborhood should be. Mayor Richardson stopped by for a while, making his rounds and shaking hands like the politician he was. When he got to me, he pulled me aside. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did during the storm. That generator really did save lives. We had several people at the shelter who wouldn't have made it through the night without heat. I'm just glad I could help, though I could have done without the whole legal drama." Character is built through adversity, Gregory. You handled an impossible situation with grace and integrity. The city appreciates it, and so do I. Whatever happened with the shelter? Is it still running? We closed it down once the weather warmed up, but we're keeping it on standby for future emergencies. And we've purchased 3 industrial generators of our own, so we won't have to rely on generous citizens next time. Good. That's good. Although, if you ever want to volunteer yours again, we'd be happy to have it, with proper permits and parking arrangements this time. We both laughed. He stayed for another hour, then headed off to another engagement. I mingled with my neighbors, listened to their concerns and their ideas, and felt a genuine sense of pride in what we were building together. As the sun set and the party wound down, I found myself thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. I had gone from being a regular guy who just wanted to keep to himself to being the president of an HOA, a witness in a criminal case, and something of a neighborhood hero. It wasn't a role I had sought out, but it was one I was learning to embrace. The following week, I received a check from the city for $375, reimbursing me for the towing fee I had paid. There was a note from Mayor Richardson thanking me again and inviting me to a city council meeting where they were going to discuss new policies for emergency equipment storage. I decided to attend. The council meeting was held on a Tuesday evening at City Hall. I had never been to one before and was surprised by how formal it was. There were about 30 people in the audience, most of them there to speak about various agenda items. When they got to the emergency equipment discussion, Mayor Richardson called me up to the podium to share my experience. I told the story of the generator, the towing, and the impact on the shelter. I talked about how a lack of clear communication and coordination had created an unnecessary crisis. I suggested that the city create a registry of residents willing to provide equipment during emergencies, along with guidelines for where and how that equipment could be stored temporarily. The council members listened attentively and asked good questions. By the end of the discussion, they had directed city staff to develop a comprehensive emergency equipment policy that would be brought back for approval at a future meeting. I left feeling like I had contributed something meaningful. Life settled into a new normal. The HOA ran smoothly under my leadership, with occasional hiccups and disagreements, but nothing major. Patricia Henderson kept to herself, though I would see her sometimes at the grocery store or the gas station. We would nod politely to each other, but never really talk. She had moved to a different part of town shortly after completing her probation, selling her house in Riverside Meadows and starting fresh somewhere else. In late August, I received a letter from her. It was handwritten on simple stationery with no return address. "Dear Gregory," it began, "I wanted to write to you one more time to express my gratitude for your kindness during a very difficult period of my life. I know I caused you and many others a great deal of pain and frustration. I let my need for control and order become more important than treating people with compassion and respect. Losing my position as HOA president and facing criminal charges was devastating, but it was also necessary. It forced me to confront parts of myself I had been avoiding for years. I've been in therapy and working on understanding why I behaved the way I did. I'm learning to be a better person. I wanted you to know that the way you handled everything, with dignity and fairness even when you had every right to be vindictive, taught me an important lesson. Thank you for being a good man and a good neighbor, even to someone who didn't deserve it. I hope you and everyone in Riverside Meadows are doing well. Sincerely, Patricia Henderson." I read the letter several times, feeling a complex mix of emotions. I was glad she was working on herself and taking responsibility for her actions. I was also relieved that she had moved on and that chapter was closed. I filed the letter away in my desk drawer and went about my day. The fall brought new challenges to the HOA. We had to deal with a roof leak in the clubhouse that required expensive repairs. We had to mediate a dispute between neighbors about a tree that was dropping leaves into one person's pool. We had to organize a Halloween event for the kids, which turned into a surprisingly contentious debate about whether or not we should have a costume contest. Through it all, I tried to apply the lessons I had learned from the generator incident. I listened to people. I tried to find reasonable compromises. I remembered that the rules existed to serve the community, not the other way around. Sometimes I succeeded. Sometimes I failed. But I always tried to treat people with respect and dignity. In November, the city held a ceremony to recognize citizens who had made significant contributions to the community during the winter storm emergency. Mayor Richardson had nominated me, along with several other people who had volunteered equipment, time, or resources. I almost didn't go because I felt embarrassed by the attention, but my neighbors convinced me it was important. The ceremony was held in the city council chambers, with about 50 people in attendance. Mayor Richardson gave a speech about the importance of community during times of crisis. Then he called up each honoree individually to receive a certificate of appreciation. When my name was called, I walked to the front of the room feeling self-conscious. Gregory Yarborough represents the best of what it means to be a citizen, the mayor said as he handed me the certificate. When his community needed help, he didn't hesitate. When he faced obstacles and opposition, he persevered. And when he had the opportunity to lead, he did so with grace and wisdom. Thank you, Gregory, for reminding us all what really matters. People applauded and I shook the mayor's hand, mumbling something about just doing what anyone would do. But as I looked out at the crowd, I saw people from my neighborhood, people from the city staff, and even a few familiar faces from the shelter. They were all smiling and clapping, and I realized that maybe what I had done actually did matter. After the ceremony, there was a reception with coffee and cookies. I talked to some of the other honorees, hearing their stories of how they had helped during the storm. A woman named Linda had opened her restaurant to provide free hot meals. A man named Carlos had used his construction equipment to clear snow from roads. A teenager named Marcus had organized his classmates to deliver blankets and supplies to elderly residents. Each story was inspiring in its own way. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the journey I had been on over the past 8 months. It had started with a simple act of generosity, loaning my generator to help people in need. That act had led to conflict, drama, legal proceedings, and ultimately transformation, both for me and for my community. I hadn't set out to be a leader or a hero. I had just tried to do the right thing, one decision at a time. The holidays came and went. The HOA organized a neighborhood light display contest, which was actually fun and brought people together without any of the drama I had come to expect. In January, we held our annual meeting to elect board members and approve the budget for the coming year. I was re-elected as president unanimously, which was both gratifying and slightly terrifying. In February, almost a year after the generator incident, I received a message from Patricia Henderson through social media. She asked if I would be willing to meet with her for coffee. I was hesitant at first, unsure what she wanted or why she felt the need to reconnect. But curiosity got the better of me and I agreed. We met at a coffee shop in Tempe, neutral territory for both of us. Patricia looked different than I remembered. Her hair was longer and less severe. She was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater. She seemed relaxed in a way I had never seen before. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as we sat down with our drinks. "I wasn't sure you would." I was curious. "How have you been?" "Good, really good actually. I got a new job working for a nonprofit that helps low-income families find housing. It's been eye-opening." "That's great. What made you choose that?" "I wanted to do something that helped people instead of just enforcing rules on them. I realized that's what was missing from my life before. I was so focused on order and control that I forgot about compassion." We talked for over an hour. She told me about her therapy, about the realizations she had had about her behavior, about the ways she was trying to change. She asked about the HOA and seemed genuinely happy to hear that things were going well. She told me about some of the families she had helped at her new job and how meaningful that work was to her. "I wanted to meet with you because I wanted you to hear directly from me that your actions that day, standing up to me and pushing back, actually changed my life for the better," she said. At the time, I was furious and humiliated, but now I can see that I needed someone to stop me. I was on a destructive path, hurting people and alienating everyone around me. You forced me to face consequences, and those consequences saved me. "I'm glad you're doing better, Patricia. I really am. And for what it's worth, I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted people to be safe and to be treated fairly. I know. And you did the right thing. I hope you can forgive me for everything I put you through. I forgave you a long time ago." We finished our coffee and said goodbye, this time with a sense of closure and peace that had been missing before. As I drove home, I thought about how strange and unpredictable life could be. A year ago, I would have considered Patricia Henderson my enemy, the embodiment of everything wrong with HOAs and petty bureaucracy. Now, I saw her as a human being who had made mistakes and was working to do better. That shift in perspective felt important somehow. Spring arrived in Arizona with its usual flourish of wildflowers and perfect weather. The neighborhood was thriving. Property values were actually up, despite Patricia's dire predictions. People were happy. The community felt like a community, not just a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. I continued my work as HOA president, handling the endless small issues and occasional big ones. I learned to delegate better, relying on the other board members to share the load. I learned when to stand firm and when to compromise. I learned that leadership was less about having all the answers and more about creating space for people to find solutions together. The generator sat in my garage, fully maintained and ready for the next emergency. The mayor's office had indeed created a registry of available equipment, and my generator was the first one listed. I hoped it would never be needed again, but I was prepared if it was. One evening in late April, I was sitting on my front porch, enjoying the sunset and thinking about nothing in particular, when my neighbor Tom walked over with a beer in each hand. "Thought you might want this," he said, handing me one. "Thanks. What's the occasion?" "No occasion. Just wanted to say thanks for everything you've done this past year. The neighborhood is a better place because of you." "I appreciate that, but it wasn't just me. A lot of people stepped up." "Yeah, but you started it. You stood up to Patricia when the rest of us were too scared or too tired. You showed us that we didn't have to just accept things the way they were." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our beers and watching the sky change colors. His kids were playing basketball in his driveway, the hoop that Patricia had tried to force him to remove. The sound of the ball bouncing and the kids laughing was perfect. "Hey, I've been meaning to ask you something," Tom said. "Are you going to run for city council? Mayor Richardson mentioned to me that he thinks you'd be great at it." "City council? No way. I've got my hands full with the HOA." "Think about it. You're good at this leadership thing, even if you don't think you are." "I'll think about it. No promises." He finished his beer and headed back home. I sat there a while longer, considering the idea. City council seemed like a huge step, way beyond anything I had ever imagined for myself. But then again, a year ago, I never would have imagined being HOA president, testifying in court, or receiving an award from the mayor. Life had a funny way of pushing you toward things you didn't think you were ready for. Maybe that was okay. Maybe being ready wasn't the point. Maybe the point was just being willing to try, to do your best, to stand up for what was right even when it was hard. I looked at my front lawn, at the small garden gnome that had started all of this in a weird way. 6 inches of ceramic rebellion against arbitrary authority. I raised my beer bottle in a silent toast to the little guy, then went inside to make dinner. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run through the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, peaceful. I passed houses where I now knew the families who lived inside. I knew their stories, their struggles, their joys. This was my community, and I was part of it in a way I had never been before. As I rounded the corner near the community clubhouse, I saw someone had left a note on the bulletin board. It was a simple piece of paper with a hand-drawn picture of a generator and the words "Thank you, Gregory," written underneath. I didn't know who had left it, but it made me smile. I finished my run and headed home, ready to face whatever the day would bring. There would be HOA issues to address, emails to answer, decisions to make. But there would also be moments of connection, opportunities to help, chances to make a difference in small but meaningful ways. That was what I had learned from the whole generator incident, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose to act with courage and compassion. That standing up for what was right might be uncomfortable in the moment, but was always worth it in the long run. That communities were built not through rigid rules and harsh enforcement, but through mutual respect, shared values, and a willingness to help each other when times got tough. I had started out just trying to help during an emergency. I had ended up becoming a leader, a witness to justice, and a catalyst for change. It wasn't a role I had wanted or sought, but it was one I had grown into. And as I stood in my driveway, looking at my house and my neighborhood, I felt proud of what we had all accomplished together. The generator was still in my garage, ready for the next crisis. The garden gnome was still on my lawn, a tiny symbol of freedom and common sense. And I was still just a regular guy trying to do the right thing, one day at a time. That, I had learned, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.